The air in Michael Vance's office was thick with the scent of old leather and fresh grief. It had been a week since my father, Robert Lynch, a man whose hands were as skilled in the boardroom as they were at inflicting emotional wounds, had passed away. My mother, Jennifer, sat perfectly composed in a plush armchair, her sorrow as curated as the charity galas she organized. My older sister, Brittany, sat beside her, occasionally dabbing a tearless eye with a silk handkerchief, a gesture I was certain she'd practiced for her next mournful social media post. And then there was me, feeling like an outsider, a role I had played for as long as I could remember. Mr. Vance, my father's corporate counsel for over 30 years, cleared his throat. He was a sharp man with weary eyes who had seen our family through every merger and acquisition, both corporate and personal. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice a polished rumble. Robert was a very precise man. His will reflects that. My mother nodded regally, as if expecting to be crowned the queen of his vast biotech empire. Brittany gave my hand a squeeze that felt more like a warning than a comfort. She had always been the golden child, the one who could do no wrong in our father's eyes. A successful social media influencer, she embodied the modern glamour and public success he admired. I, on the other hand, was the quiet academic. My passion for history and forensic genealogy was something my father openly called a frivolous hobby. He wanted a daughter who was a reflection of his own ambition, and Brittany played that part beautifully. I was a disappointment he never bothered to hide. Mr. Vance began reading through the standard bequests. My mother was to receive the primary residence and a substantial stock portfolio. Brittany was bequeathed the family's luxury beach house and a trust fund that would make her financially independent for life. I held my breath, expecting my own mention to be a footnote. "And now," Mr. Vance said, pausing to adjust his glasses, "we come to the portion concerning Madison." He looked at me with an expression of genuine pity, and my stomach twisted into a cold knot. To his daughter, Madison Lynch, he bequeaths the remainder of his estate, including his investment portfolio and controlling shares in Lynch Biogenetics. Valued at approximately $25 million. A collective gasp filled the room. Brittany's perfectly manicured hand flew to her chest. My mother stared at the lawyer as if he'd spoken in a foreign language. I was speechless. It made no sense. This was a man who once told me my university degree was worth less than the paper it was printed on. However, Mr. Phelps, Vance continued, his voice dropping, "This inheritance is contingent upon a specific condition." He read directly from the will, his voice adopting the cold, clinical tone I knew so well as my father's. "This bequest is conditional upon Madison Lynch providing scientific, irrefutable proof of her genetic integrity. She must submit to a DNA test to confirm that she is, in fact, my biological daughter." The silence was deafening. It was a slap in the face from beyond the grave, a public declaration of his doubt. The humiliation was a physical force pressing down on me. My mother was the first to speak, her voice a horrified whisper. "Robert, why?" But Brittany recovered quickly, her shock morphing into a smug, pitying smile. "Oh, Madison, honey," she cooed. "Don't worry. It's just a formality. Daddy was always so thorough." The will stated that if the condition wasn't met, the inheritance would default to her. Of course it would. I looked at Mr. Vance, my voice surprisingly steady. "I'll do it. Schedule the test." Not for the money, not for the estate, but to stand on the scorched earth of my father's final cruel act and claim the one thing that was mine, my identity. While waiting for the results, my life felt suspended. I went to work, losing myself in the quiet order of historical archives, but my mind was a constant loop of the scene in that office. My father's cold obsession with lineage had always been the backdrop of my life. He saw his DNA as a brand, a blueprint for success that he expected to be passed down untarnished. He celebrated Brittany's every achievement as a continuation of his own legacy, while my passion for the past was something he dismissed entirely. Genealogy? He'd once scoffed at a family dinner. Why are you so obsessed with digging up dead people, Madison? The Lynch legacy is about the future, not the past. He never understood that for me, history wasn't about the dead, it was about the truth. It was about finding the clear, factual lines that connect us to who we are, a clarity I had never felt in my own home. His will was the ultimate expression of that disdain. He hadn't just insulted my career, he had attacked the very core of my existence. Brittany, however, saw the situation not as a tragedy, but as content. The day after the reading, she launched a new monetized series on her social media channels titled Legacy of Grace, Navigating Complex Family Dynamics. Without ever using my name, she framed herself as the stoic heir, the dutiful daughter forced to protect her family's legacy from unforeseen complications. In one artfully shot video, she sat by a fireplace, a single tear rolling down her cheek. "Sometimes," she said, her voice trembling with practiced vulnerability, "the people who are supposed to be your anchor are the ones who create the storm. It's so important to hold on to your truth, even when the world questions your family's story." The comments poured in by the thousands. "You are so strong, Brittany." Sending love and light, you are the definition of grace. Blood is thicker than water. Your true legacy will shine through. She was turning my private humiliation into a public spectacle, positioning herself as the heartbroken protector of a dynasty under threat. She was monetizing my pain, building her brand on the foundation of my father's cruelty. Each post, each story, each carefully worded caption felt like a fresh cut. She spoke of integrity, of unbreakable bonds, and the purity of a family name, all subtle digs meant to amplify my isolation. One evening, she called me, her voice dripping with false concern. "Maddie, sweetie, I just want you to know, whatever happens, I'll make sure you're taken care of. I was thinking of setting up a small trust for you. Something to help you with your little history projects." The condescension was breathtaking. She had already written the ending to this story, an ending where she was the magnanimous heiress and I was the charity case, the pretender finally cast out. My father had built a house of lies and expectations, and Brittany was now its self-appointed guardian. They both expected me to be a quiet, sad footnote, but they had made a critical mistake. They had forgotten what I do for a living. I find the truth, no matter how deep it's buried. And as I waited for that email from the lab, I realized my father hadn't just given me a challenge. He had given me a case to solve. The email arrived on a gray Thursday morning. The subject line was stark: Paternity Analysis, Lynch, Robert, and Madison. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. The digital file that would either affirm my entire life or erase it. My finger hovered over the trackpad, a wave of nausea washing over me. The memory of Brittany's smug face and my father's lifelong dismissal pushed me forward. I clicked. The report was a simple PDF, a wall of scientific jargon I scrolled past, my eyes hunting for the conclusion. And then I saw it, at the bottom of the page in bold, unequivocal text. Conclusion. Robert Lynch is confirmed as the biological father of the subject, Madison Lynch. The probability of paternity is 99.999%. A wave of relief so powerful it made me dizzy washed over me. I let out a raw, choked laugh. I was his daughter. His final, cruel test had failed. The validation was a balm on a wound I hadn't realized was so deep. My first instinct was to forward the report to Michael Vance and end this nightmare. I imagined the look on Brittany's face, the forced smile she'd have to plaster on as she congratulated me. The thought was deeply satisfying. I saved the PDF to my desktop and was about to close the email when I noticed something I'd overlooked in my haste. There was a second attachment. It was labeled Supplemental Report on Familial Markers. Curiosity pricked at me. I opened it. This report was different, more detailed. It seemed to be a broader comparison, noting that a sibling's DNA had also been provided for reference. My father, in his meticulous paranoia, must have had them use Brittany's sample as a control. My blood ran cold. I scrolled through the dense text, my eyes scanning for anything in plain English. And then I found it, a summary paragraph at the end. The analysis confirms Madison Lynch and Robert Lynch share the required genetic markers for a father-daughter relationship. However, when comparing the profiles of Madison Lynch and the sibling reference, Brittany Lynch, a significant discrepancy was found. While they share a maternal link, they do not share the same paternal genetic markers. In conclusion, Madison Lynch and Brittany Lynch are half-sisters. They have the same mother, but different biological fathers. I read the paragraph again and again. The screen swam before my eyes. It didn't make sense. It was impossible. Brittany, the golden child, the spitting image of our father, the one who was the living embodiment of the Lynch legacy, was not a Lynch at all. My father had aimed a bomb at me, but the blast radius was about to consume his perfect, beloved daughter. The initial shock gave way to a dizzying, cold clarity. All my life, I had been the outsider. All along, it was she who didn't belong. I thought of my mother's panicked calls, her desperate questions about the results. She wasn't worried about me. She was terrified of this. She had lived with this lie for over 30 years. In that moment, the hurt and humiliation of the past few weeks receded, replaced by a steely sense of purpose. The quiet archivist was gone. The forensic genealogist had just been handed the case of her life. My father had wanted scientific, irrefutable proof. He had no idea what he had truly asked for. My small loft transformed into an investigative headquarters. The emotional storm inside me had subsided, leaving behind the calm, methodical focus of my profession. The DNA report was the primary document, the undeniable fact from which all other truths would be uncovered. I approached my family's history not as a daughter, but as a genealogist, searching for the cracks in a carefully constructed narrative. I started with dates. Brittany was born 31 years ago. I cross-referenced that with my parents' life at the time. My father was a driven, ambitious CEO, even then, consumed with building his company. My mother was a prominent socialite, the perfect corporate wife. I pulled up digital archives of old society pages, looking for photos, for names, for anyone who didn't fit. And then I found him. Christopher Davies, a charismatic research fellow from England, on a 1-year residency at a local institute my father's company helped fund. For about 8 months, his name appeared frequently alongside my mother's at charity functions and galas. In one photo, they were laughing together, his hand resting on her arm in a way that was too familiar. My father stood slightly to the side, his expression unreadable. Davis's fellowship ended 3 months before Brittany was born. He returned to the UK, married, had a family, and became a distinguished professor, a ghost who had left an indelible mark. The evidence was circumstantial, but the timeline was a perfect fit. The biggest question remained. Did my father know, or did he just suspect? The cruelty of the will felt too specific, too targeted to be based on a vague doubt. That thought led me to the place my father kept his most important secrets, his private server. It took me 2 days to bypass the encryption, using a mix of old passwords I remembered and software I used for recovering data from damaged historical drives. And there it was. A single folder, created over a decade ago. It was labeled, simply, Contingency. Inside were 2 files. The first was a PDF, a private DNA report on Brittany, dated 10 years prior. The conclusion was the same. She was not his biological child. The second file was an unsent letter, addressed to my mother. Jennifer, it began. Today I learned the truth I think I have always known. The question is not what you did, but what we do now. The Lynch name is everything. Our legacy must be protected. We will never speak of this. She will never know. She will continue to be my daughter in every way that matters. We will take this to our graves. He had known. For 10 years, he had raised his beloved daughter knowing she wasn't his. He had played the part of the proud father, all while nursing this colossal betrayal. The will was not a question aimed at me. It was his final, posthumous act of revenge against my mother. He couldn't expose the lie while he was alive without destroying the precious legacy he'd built. So he devised a game he knew he couldn't lose. He used me, the daughter he was sure of, as the trigger. He weaponized my DNA to fire a bullet from the grave, aimed directly at the heart of my mother's secret. My father's coldness suddenly made a terrible kind of sense. He wasn't a monster. He was a man playing the long game, a meticulously planned revenge plot that had just reached its devastating conclusion. I asked Michael Vance to arrange one final meeting. To finalize the transfer, I said. My mother and Brittany arrived together, wearing the brittle confidence of people who believed they'd survived a crisis unscathed. Brittany offered me a thin smile. Well, Madison, she said loudly, I'm glad we can finally put this unpleasantness behind us. My mother smoothed her blouse, her poise restored. She thought the danger had passed. She had no idea the real reckoning hadn't even begun. I sat opposite them, 2 manila folders resting on the table. Before we sign, I began calmly, there are a few findings from Dad's investigation we need to address. Brittany rolled her eyes. You passed. Congratulations. Can we move on? This wasn't a competition, I said. It was a search for the truth, and Dad found more than any of us expected. I slid the folders toward them. Brittany opened hers first, still smug, until she wasn't. The moment she read the supplemental DNA report, her expression collapsed. My mother's hands shook as she lifted her own pages. When she reached the highlighted paragraph, a low, broken sound escaped her. This is fake, Brittany whispered. It's from the same lab, I replied. We share a mother. But Robert Lynch is not your father. Silence hit the room like a physical weight. Turn the page. They did. The timeline, the travel records, the photos of Christopher Davies. Then the final comparison, his headshot beside a recent photo of Brittany. The resemblance was undeniable. But the last document was mine to reveal. A DNA test my father had commissioned a decade earlier. I placed it between us. He knew. All this, the will, the conditions, wasn't punishment for me. It was a truth he intended for you. The power in the room didn't shift. It shattered. Brittany stumbled to her feet and fled without a word. Within weeks, her online empire disappeared. She sold her condo, changed her name, and moved across the country, severing herself from the family that had deceived her. My mother's downfall was slower but harsher. Without my father's name shielding her, the whispers in her social circle became open condemnation. She sold the family home and retreated into a small, quiet life. We speak occasionally, stilted, fragile conversations, with no apologies, only the weight of what cannot be undone. I took my father's board seat, promoted a capable CEO, and returned to the archives, the place where truth is preserved, not buried. I used part of my inheritance to found the Lynch Foundation for Historical Preservation and Forensic Genealogy. My father mocked my passion. Now his wealth fuels it. In the end, my inheritance wasn't the money. It was the truth, devastating, clarifying, and liberating. I am Madison Lynch, and the historical record is my legacy.